Over the past 3 decades, the number of sprockets on your cassette has increased from 6 all the way up to 11, with Campagnolo, the Italian group set brand, most recently going up to 12. But of course, American brand SRAM, with their Eagle group set, is 12-speed off-road already. So where does that leave us? Do we actually need 12 speeds? And what does that mean for our bikes, our wheels, and is it an advantage to have that extra sprocket?
Well, there are positives and negatives to this thing, as always. But we'll start with the positives.
We're positive people, aren't we?
Exactly. So, obviously, the most obvious and basic, you get an extra gear.
A whole extra
and
gear.
Who doesn't want an extra gear? But an extra gear doesn't really mean that much. It's the ratios between the gears that matter.
It's how the companies use that.
Exactly.
And what offerings they give us.
Yeah.
Options.
So we already see on 11 speed, Shimano Ultegra is capable of an 11 to 34 cassette in the long cage mode. So it's whether we would want a 12 gear to go larger than that, or whether we'd want to keep those steps smaller. So we could have the same size, so like an 11 to 32 cassette, but just have smaller jumps between the gears to give it a bit of a nicer feel when you're pedaling.
I think that's the problem we've been faced with the larger ranged cassettes. Sometimes you just want smaller increments between the cogs, basically, don't you?
Absolutely.
So hopefully 12 speed does sort of start to bridge that gap from the extremes of an 11 to a 34.
Because I think it depends on the type of rider you are, I guess, and also where you ride. So if you ride in like the Lake District or something where it's like 25% climbs, you probably would rather have that higher top end of the cassette. But if you just ride on the flat, then you're going to appreciate smaller jumps between gears. So all you really have to do is like just walking up a set of stairs.
It's that
really,
middle of the block, isn't it? It's sort of where the most efficient chain line is, where you can ride a large front and a large cog rear, which makes efficiency really good. So the advantages are extra gear, closer ratios, or potentially moving into the more extremes of ratios, like the get out of jail cog that you have in mountain biking, where you have like that massive 42 sprocket somewhere. But that does come at a price. And what are the disadvantages of a 12 up system? So we thought of a few, but Campag have sort of solved one or two of those as we've gone along, really.
So one would be weight. So it's an extra gear on the rear, so that's more metal, it's more material to construct the cassettes out of. But I think it's probably quite marginal, really. So Campag released it on Record and Super Record. Both are like a carbon fibre composite, really high end. The chain set's made out of carbon fibre. The cassette's made out of like a monolithic steel, but they've milled it away so much that it doesn't really weigh that much anyway.
Right. The other disadvantage could be the stress on the chain or on the drivetrain. I mean, we're going narrower here to fill the space. Not going into specs and specifications just yet, because you've got to think about the wheels and how the other brands do it. But Campag have managed to fit the 12-speed cassette onto 11-speed hub, haven't they?
They have, and it's, on the one hand, I think that's quite the feat, really, and also quite impressive, because they obviously realise that nobody's going to fork out the cash for a new set of borers, really.
Well, you've already had to change the shifters,
right? Exactly.
And the chain set and the rear.
And it's
mech.
Campag, so it's going to be pretty on the top end of stuff.
Pricey.
So the new rear mech allows the chain to engage more teeth on the cassette, so it kind of spreads the load, across it.
Okay, that's interesting.
Which is an interesting idea.
So more of the cassette is engaged.
Yeah.
And less strain
on the links or on the teeth.
Individual links and the jockeys and
exactly. And they've increased the size of the jockey wheels as well.
Okay.
So there's
interesting.
They've just basically spread the load across a greater surface area.
Obviously, we haven't had enough time with the Campag 12-speed Record, Super Record group sets, but it is a question whether they are more durable or less durable, or there'll be more problems, or you have to look after them a bit more than you would with the 11-speed. And it was interesting going back a few years from 10 to 11. The same questions were made, but 10-speed chains, especially in sort of the Shimano department, weren't the best. I mean, I seem to remember a lot of failures, especially around my friends and my ride mates.
Right.
But once we went over to 11, you hardly
When
hear.
do you snap an 11-speed chain?
You've never heard of a problem. That basically leads us into the disadvantage of shifting. Is it going to be worse? Is it going to be better? Does the smaller steps and smaller ratios and width between each sprocket mean that the shifting will be more crisp or better? If you go into the extremes, especially if you're going from the 9, 10 sprocket up to the 42, the jumps are quite big, and the narrower the cassette is and the spacing between really does put pressure on the mech to work twice as hard to get that lift up. So Campagnolo have set their stall out and laid their cards firmly on the table. They've gone 12 speed, but they haven't gone extreme with it. They've been pretty cautious with how they've done it.
Yeah.
But what do we expect from SRAM and Shimano? What do we want from them? Well, quite simply, I think we need them to go extreme. Don't you?
We want to see the other end of this,
Yeah.
And I think if we were going to lay that at anyone's feet, that would be SRAM, the masters of going big with gears.
Go big or go home.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and always kind of done. They do it very well, but they've always kind of done it a little bit differently to the other two, I think.
Yeah.
And I love that. I
Yeah.
love that there's a
Yeah,
group
yeah.
set maker out there just being like, no, this can be done differently,
Yeah.
and that's a reason to do it. They have that rear mech technology, and they understand the importance of the clutch and the spacing of the cassette.
Obviously, Campagnolo have stuck it in their sort of normal realm of things with the 29 and the 32. So they haven't pushed the boundaries of that just yet. But SRAM obviously have done that on the off-road scene, but it's not quite the same.
It's not. I don't think us roadies would be quite as willing to sit and maybe churn a, like a 35, 36, or even potentially more, because it does make a bit of a racket.
Yeah.
It's hard to shift into, and it kind of feels like it can't be doing that much good on the rear end.
No one likes a noisy bike or a noisy chain.
No.
It does sound like there's something horribly
Whereas
going on,
mountain
isn't
bikers, they don't care 'cause it's always covered in mud anyway. So
is.
it's always making a horrible noise.
it? It is. And they only need to go downhill, really.
Exactly. So they're just spinning their way up. So it's interesting to see. Like I said, I think the real place this will take off is on the burgeoning adventure side of things, really.
And I think the other thing that 12-speed could bring to the table is offering more of a spectrum on the one-by system. So it'll be really interesting to see what SRAM brings to the table, or Shimano, for example. Can we go from a 9-tooth sprocket right up to a 42, and it gives you that ultimate range that you'd need. The Aqua Blue have their 3T Strada bike that they're using, and they're using the one-by setup. And we've often questioned, if they did get into the big races this year, which they haven't, unfortunately, how would have they dealt with the big mountain stages? And will that extra sprocket on the back allow them to go extreme in the sprint and extreme up the climb, so they'll be looked after all day, no problems at all? I think that's a question that we're sort of begging from SRAM.
And I think a lot of this is driven by the pro peloton often, and Aqua Blue are currently the only team doing that.
Yeah.
But if, like you say, they made it into the big leagues, then maybe things would change. Maybe then SRAM would have to turn around and go, okay, well, these guys need something different.
Yeah.
They need to be able to do it all.
And something we were discussing on the way here, and what we would like to see from Shimano, is a high-end super plush, works extremely well, Dura-Race Di2,
Definitely.
12-speed group set.
I think if you look at Shimano, right, they are the masters of engineering. And I think everything they do is so precise and methodical, and they'd be the perfect ones to create this incredible racing group set.
Yeah, a classic 5339 chainring with an 1128 cassette.
With synchro shift in there as well.
Yeah.
Get your phone out, you tune it perfectly how you want it, and it's so dialed and so precise.
That's what.
That's what I'd like to see.
And it's
Stretch.
important to stress with Shimano, they won't release anything until they're truly happy with it and actually see a need for it and there's a want for it from the consumer and pros alike. They don't just willy-nilly just release anything out there. When I went to see Shimano in Japan a couple of years ago, they were like, everything needs to be good. There needs to be a reason for it. We're not just producing things so people buy it. There's a need to be a want, and we need to know how that works and how good it works and how good we can get it. And if we're satisfied, then we release it. The last couple of updates with Shimano, they've teased us with the launch, and then we don't see the products for a very long time. Which is good for us because you know, we know it works when it does eventually turn up. And that's it. That is our wish list for a 12-speed group set from Shimano and SRAM. But well done to Campag for what they've achieved so far. A bit conservative, but it sounds like it
Pretty
works
exciting.
really well.
Beautiful to use as well.
Pretty jealous that you got to go and test that out. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe our Cycling Weekly channel. And if you've got anything you would like us to discuss, please leave a comment in our comment section below. But until next time, we'll see you then. Let's go fly a kite up to the high. Is that the words?
Yeah, man, why not?